So Liz, welcome. Thank you for being part of the Irish Goodbye Business Podcast. As you know, the podcast is all about interviewing real people with real careers, and we're very much interested in the journey that you've taken, what you've learned along the way, and some of the pearls of wisdom that you would pass to the next generation that's coming through. So really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you being here. If I may, I'll ask you to perhaps just introduce yourself and your background and a bit about your career, and we'll go from there. But as I say, thanks again for being part of the podcast.
Well, thank you for even remotely asking me to be part of the podcast. I'm excited. It's my first podcast, so for all those listeners out there, forgive me if I make any quips that don't quite deliver well.
Well, keep it clean, Liz.
I'll try to keep. Well, it's early, so we can certainly keep it clean at this point. I mean, we can certainly go down the rabbit holes too. But in any case, Brian, certainly thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity. A little bit about myself, just to kind of ground anyone who may listen to this. I have spent pretty much the last 25 years in corporate retail. I've led everything from demand planning to forecasting to omni-channel operations, logistics, and large-scale transformation programs. I'm sure we'll get into some of that. But essentially, for me at my core, I get, really excited and really passionate about, just taking complex problems and making them simple. I tend to be kind of the wizard behind the scenes, just making sure that everything runs as smooth, if not smoother than your daily cup of coffee. So I'm a problem solver who basically turns chaos into order. That's kind of me in a nutshell, both professionally and personally.
There you go.
So that's me.
Fantastic. And so within that, as you mentioned, Liz, in corporate retail, I think you've had a number of different roles, as you say, demand planning, forecasting, you've done sales, you've done technology, you've moved into sort of operations and so on. So you mentioned something there. You said you take a complex problem and you make it simple. So I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit, because I think for people that are perhaps earlier on in their career or starting out, that could be a daunting prospect. So how would you perhaps define a complex problem, and what are the things that you do to make it simple and keep everyone organized towards a common goal?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the one, I guess, kind of reflection point that I'll go back to was really during probably one of the more recent SAP implementations that I did during my time at Tapestry. It was a beast of a project, loads and loads of, millions of dollars, spent on it. And essentially we were, ripping out the core infrastructure and rebuilding, basically the skyscraper without essentially, having the building tumble. It's kind of the best way to describe what we were looking to achieve. As you can imagine, that's quite complex. And we were essentially changing, over three, quarters of every business process that made the company tick. So that, it brought a lot of change, it brought a lot of anxiety, it brought a lot of just angst amongst a lot of the business process areas for just the day-to-day operations. So you can imagine, kind of everybody scratching their head going, how is this going to impact me? What do I need to do? How, why is this important? I need to still be able to do my day-to-day job. I don't have time, to train and learn a new system, so on and so forth. So it took a lot of grit and perseverance and discipline, and also knowledge and experience in the various areas of the business. And I think that echoes back to, because I have a variety of experiences, from the sales to the operations to demand forecasting, just being able to understand the impact zones across the business and every facet of the business allowed me to ease some of those tensions within business partners and, speak their language. And I think, you work in technology, when you're implementing a large, transformative, technically, advanced transformation program, a lot of it is technical language, right? And business partners just kind of turn off, right? You're either creative or, you're business minded and you can understand some of that technical jargon. But I played that role of bridging between, business and tech. And I would say, kind of breaking that down into the different kind of digestible chunks for them to understand, what needed to concern them versus what was changing versus, what was a benefit. I think that's, kind of an example of taking something super complex and simplifying it. And the simplification came in just, walking alongside my business partners and saying, hey, this is how your world's going to change. Here's the degrees of change, and how it's going to impact not only you and your ability to do your job, but also your teams.
Yeah. So, within that, then, Liz, it sounds like you had multiple stakeholders that you were managing. Yeah. You had multiple different dimensions of the business. And you touched on something there that I think is really interesting. You said, your sort of background working in those different functions of the business allowed you to help translate and to language and value that those different teams could understand. So, and I think the point there that is interesting for people, a lot of people's journeys in their career are not necessarily linear.
Right.
So as you go through those different adventures and those different departments and those different experiences that you have, it's all not for naught. And the combination of those experiences can always be used in a way that you can deliver and find value for your stakeholders. So I'm curious how you kind of operationalize that activity. So there's multiple, I'm imagining that there's multiple departments, there's multiple people. Yeah. So how did you organize the teams around you? How did you organize those people to help assuage their anxiety and their fear as you talk about? Yeah, I think
it's not easy, and it certainly wasn't easy. And using that as the example, the SAP implementation, it really came down to, you have to meet the people where they are. And for me, I may have had, an upper hand because I had trust and kind of tenure in the organization. So I think that also, helped people feel a little bit more trustworthy of the change and certainly the process that was going to, to unfold. And not everybody has that experience. Not everybody, kind of brings with them kind of that tenure, that integrity, because I was there for so long that people knew who I was, and, certainly knew I had a really solid reputation and, and was trustworthy, and certainly had the integrity into, delivery of message and the change. So I think that went a long way, certainly for me, being able to bridge all the different gaps across the various functional areas of the business. And that did not, kind of fall deaf on me. It was, being able to leverage my network, also being able to leverage the relationships that I built, throughout my tenure with the organization at the time, really helped, just instill, faith that it was going to be okay in the end, right? Like there was a lot of change that we had to go through, but in the end, it would be okay. Yes. Were there going to be moments that sucked royally? Absolutely. Absolutely. Like anybody who has been part of an SAP project, and sorry, SAP, it's brutal. Like it is not a fun, it tends to not be a fun project, because it's very complex. It's very technical at times. You have a lot of change, going with it, and systems and, and process and people, etc. So it can be, certainly a bear, but I would say, based on my experience, I think it was just the integrity and the trustworthiness that people had in me because of my experience and tenure at the company.
So, just to extrapolate that a little bit, because you know, you're talking about the complexity that exists in an SAP transformation. I know what that means. I worked for Oracle for a long time with Oracle e-business suite, which would be a competitive product. Perhaps for people that aren't listening, for people that are listening that perhaps don't have that background, it might be useful for them to sort of understand, well, what actually is SAP. And I'm drawing the connection between your statement around doing demand planning, forecasting, sales. Many of those functions exist within SAP. Useful,
Yeah.
if you might just be able to articulate what were the functions that you were transforming within the business. And you mentioned something as well that I think is really interesting. So you talked about the importance of trust and integrity. How do you manage those stakeholders when it goes pear-shaped, when you've gone and told what's going to happen and it's not being delivered? And how do you manage those the bi-directional communication between the business stakeholders and the technology delivery, and help keep everyone hopefully aligned?
Well, I would like to say, let me take the easy question first, but geez, those are some whoppers. So I'll take, I'll try to simplify, SAP in the sense that, for the listeners, this particular podcast and, just hearing, my background. So clearly I've worked in corporate retail. So as you think about corporate retail and all the various, functional areas that go along with it, you have finance, you have supply chain, you have buying, you have merchandise planning, you have just the merchandising, aspect, you have visual store operations, inventory management. So, kind of from soup to nuts, every, part of the value chain to run corporate retail was impacted in a way through the SAP implementation, whether it was from, entering in purchase orders, that went to our suppliers, certainly to produce the goods and make sure that, they got certainly at the right manufacturer to get on the right, freight inbound into our, distribution centers. Every facet was impacted. So as you think about just the scale of that is quite huge and certainly can be quite complex. It was a global implementation. So you had to get on, everyone, had to get on board with the change. So, from our UK partners to our Asia partners to our, North America partners, it was a lot. And not everybody, was certainly following the change train at the same time. So I think, from that aspect to kind of go to the next, question, which is, when it goes pear-shaped and, how do you get, the people on board? It really comes down to just, I said it earlier, is just meeting them where they're at, and kind of really trying to break it down into a level of understanding on, this project particularly, it was moving forward no matter what, right? So you either got on board or you didn't. We think about it similarly to AI, and, I know I'm kind of, going a little off, kilter, but AI at the speed in which that's evolving, you either have to get on board or be left behind.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So similar parallel comparison with the SAP implementation as the example of it was happening no matter if people liked it or not. So you just had to really just understand where those kinks in the chain were, and and how did you kind of move them along, whether you had to double down on training and, additional time spent, whatever it may have been, you just had to understand what those needs were and you had to pivot.
Yeah. And you mentioned network in there, right? You'd established a network from your tenure and, trust established in you within the business. And I think that's a really important thing for anyone in their career is to establish that network. I've coached people in my workplace who are looking for things like promotions, and I've worked really hard, I've had really good numbers. Why isn't anyone tapping me on the shoulder to give me a promotion? What I encourage them to think about is obviously the importance of having a good network, good good mentors if you can, if you can find them as well. Making sure that people know who you are within the workplace as well. And I always say to people, one of the things that you should do is, if your skip level manager, for example, doesn't know who you are, go and put time on their schedule, have a ask to buy them a coffee, and ask them to give you some advice and guidance on your career. And I especially think that's important for
extremely important.
Yeah, for younger people to help get a sense, to expand their visibility within the network, and really think through, how if they want to advance their career, how they might do it. It's really important that people know.
And that's it's a scary thing, right? It's a scary thing to do, especially when they don't know, the person, or maybe they haven't had the best interactions, with those people.
Yeah. So within your background, Liz, which is, you've got a ton of interesting roles and responsibilities that you've had there. What would be a role or a job that you did that would really surprise people to find out that you once did?
Well, I've had a lot, but I think the one that, the one that, really gets people, well, I guess it depends on the generation too. So, those who are fans, certainly will get excited. Cool. But early on in my career, when I first really jumped into working in Manhattan, I worked for the satellite office, so basically the management office for U2. So I was young. I mean, certainly, was a fan at the time. Wasn't, hardcore fan. I mean, I don't think there's many people out there at the time, at least, that, wasn't a fan of U2. I mean, right. Huge music artist that has, made quite an impact, in the music space. But I was the office manager. We were the satellite office. There was only 3 of us. Yeah. And it was such a fun job. We sat in this tiny little office, and I basically just, at the time, they really needed just organization, someone to answer the phones, do the filing. For those listening, there were fax machines back then. So yes, I'm dating myself a little bit. There was also we moved away from rotary phones, although they still existed, but we had regular phones. But I had a Rolodex. There was no internet. It was just, starting to break onto the scene. So I think, just being so young and really having to learn how to be, quite resourceful. But I would say that's probably one of the jobs that I like to say, like, hey, I was cool at one point. I worked in the music industry. Yeah.
Well, me too. Although I never got to meet U2, but it's very on brand for the Irish Goodbye business.
I know. Yeah. So it was a good one. It's a fun example.
So that's great. So what's been one moment in your career that's kind of felt like a disaster, or you felt like perhaps you've failed, but has turned out to be a gift, and what did you learn from it?
A disaster. I mean, I don't think anything in my career was necessarily a disaster.
Perhaps feels like perhaps you made some at the time, can feel like maybe you made a mistake or did something wrong. Maybe disasters, maybe a bit.
Yeah, so I would think that the one thing that could easily pop into my head is I was working for Ann Taylor, and I worked for Ann Taylor before I came to Coach/Tapestry. And it's an apparel company for those that are unfamiliar. And I had left working at L'Oreal prior to joining Ann Taylor. And, I had a long tenure when I worked at L'Oreal, which is, beauty and cosmetics and fragrances. And I knew that, I was at a crossroads. I could either, stay with L'Oreal, which was a wonderful company, and I loved, everything about it. And I could stay there and really kind of, be on a more linear path, just from an industry perspective, or I could make the jump and go into fashion, which, for anyone who knows me and certainly will watch or listen to this, knows that fashion is my passion. I know that sounds really cheesy, but I love it. I love clothes. I love accessories. I love everything about, the fashion industry, except for those, those not so nice, people that work in it sometimes. But in any case, I made the decision, to jump ship, and I went into, working for Ann Taylor, which at the time, wonderful company, loved it, was really fun. That's when I jumped from kind of sales development into store planning. So I kind of moved into the planning part of my experience, and I was there. I had a wonderful boss, and then kind of the business started to take a turn, and it became kind of this revolving door. And I think fashion and retail is very cyclical, and people change, industries, when they're trying to figure things out. But at the time, business was a little rocky, and every week I would come in and people were leaving. And I mean, it was like, a new resignation every single week. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening? I'm like, I just jumped ship from, this wonderful company into fashion. Did I make the right decision? So I got nervous. I got, some cold feet, and I was just like, all right, well, maybe I should, kind of see the writing on the wall, and I think I'm going to look for a new job. So fast forward, long story boring, as some of our friends say. I changed. I left Ann Taylor at the time, and I went to work at another company for only a few weeks. And it really probably took me about 48 hours to realize that this was not the right decision. Like, it was not good. It was just not the right fit, despite, kind of everything reading to it being perfect. But I dug deep, and I called my old boss, who was new at the time when I left. And I said, I made the wrong decision. I'm like, can I come back? Which you can imagine takes a lot of humility to be able to say, like, I left, I made the wrong decision, can I come back? And she was wonderful. And she said, you clearly left for a reason. Let's find you a different opportunity, and let's see what we can do. And fast forward, I came back to work for Ann Taylor, a different division. I got a promotion out of it. I got more money, and I was working for probably one of the best bosses I've ever had. And she was amazing. So something bad turned into something wonderful, and really kind of set the stage for, how I really explored the rest of my career.
I think you've touched on something there that's really, really interesting. There's a couple of themes that we've unpacked with other guests as we've gone through the podcast. And you mentioned, obviously, Ann Taylor, you said there's a revolving door, a lot of people kind of coming in and out. And we've talked in the past about contagion, and contagion can have two forms in my mind. One is negative and one is positive. And I think oftentimes you can see in an environment like that, people start to get their head down.
Mm-hmm.
It starts to spread, and that can be a very, very dangerous thing. And I think it's important to look objectively at the situation that you're in and decide, is this real or is this not?
Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting here is that you said you made a move and you quickly figured out that it wasn't the right move for you. But what most interesting is, instead of just, I think a lot of people would in that situation would just kind of keep going and keep going. But you took a corrective action, and and back to the thing that you said right at the beginning, there's a theme here, I think, in the importance of network.
Yeah.
And the importance of maintaining a network. And as you leave a role or a position, you never want to burn bridges, because
Never.
like you say, you might need to make that call and say, I've made a mistake, but that mistake turned out to be a very positive. It wasn't necessarily a mistake, but you figured it out and you took a corrective action. And I think for many people, they get stuck in a position that they don't like, or they're unhappy with their job, but they don't do anything about it. And you've got to take those corrective actions. And I think also having a good manager is absolutely critical as well.
Yeah, agree. I mean, it all comes down to, we all know, one person can, make a difference, and that can be positive or negative. It takes one person, to make the world, a lovely place or not so lovely place. And,
Yeah.
Same thing, applies in the corporate world as well. And I've been very fortunate. I've had wonderful bosses. I've also had some not so wonderful bosses, who you are. Uh, but there is, if I was to give some advice, there is a learning in every situation, whether right, whether you're learning, the skills or the qualities, to be a wonderful and really great leader, or the skills and qualities that you don't want to, have and instill to be a bad leader, right? And you just have to listen to your gut in the end. And it was hard, trust me. I suffered for quite a few weeks. And but it goes back to, you never want to burn a bridge. I could have very easily said, you know what, this is not for me. But despite how miserable I was in that new role, I stuck it out. I wanted to at least, and I certainly didn't need to, but I was like, no, I'm going to give them 2 weeks. I'm not going to leave them high and dry. I'm going to do the, the due diligence and be, respectable and, and professional about it. But it was brutal. Yeah.
You made a really interesting statement there, and this is something that I would encourage to literally anyone. And I think it's really your instinct, your gut is always right. It's always right. And I've in the past overruled that.
Oh my gosh! Whenever you've overruled it, it always comes back to bite you.
And when I overruled it and did something counter to what my instincts and my intuition was telling me, that's when I've made the biggest mistakes and the biggest issues in my career and in my certainly in my personal life. So I would I really think that piece of information is really, really important. Listen to your gut, follow your instincts. They're always right. And that's not just in the career, that's not just in the
it's all around. And it's really hard to do, because sometimes it's telling you what you most fear, or it's telling you what you don't want to hear. It's true. I mean, in the end, you have to listen to what your instinctual core gut is telling you. And 99.9% of the time, it really never steers you wrong.
Yeah, and it might be it might be telling you something radical, but you should
Exactly. Yeah. But you gotta, you just gotta take the plunge sometimes, and have some blind faith, which is not easy. But yeah, I'm a firm believer everything happens for a reason. So
couldn't agree more. So within your career experience, what's one of the things that you think perhaps is total nonsense? What's one rule of business that you always swear by?
Oh gosh, I would say total nonsense, especially as a working mom and female, is that you can't have it all. I was told early on in my career, that you had to pick one. You couldn't be, a mom and also have a successful career. At the time, I mean, honestly, that was going back, 20, 25 years ago. So very different, kind of mindset than, as where we are today in the world. I just thought that was hogwash. I was like, that's absolutely just absurd. Like that. No, I don't believe in that. I think it's just, you have to strike a balance. Sometimes you have to lean into, to one more than others and make some sacrifices, but you also have to have a good support system to do so. And then I think, gosh, one that I swear by is, if you work hard and you're kind, success will come your way.
Yeah. So I think I agree with you. I think, if you I think that statement about working hard and being kind is critical. And that's it's interesting that you say that, because kindness, empathy, especially for people that have been in managerial positions as well, leading with the assumption that everyone wants to do the right thing and is you form your opinion on the basis, or your initial opinion on the basis that everyone shuts up and wants to do the right thing is critical. And I think that shapes your interactions and your engagements with people. And as you talked about, you know, when you're delivering bad news or projects gone off the rails, you know, how you conduct yourself before that, when you get to that point, I think that certainly makes a big difference. So I think that's really,
and it never, I mean, you know, when you have to deliver bad news, God, no one likes to deliver bad news, but and certainly, you know, I've had my fair share of delivering and certainly being delivered to. And I think, you know, in the end, and it really just echoes back to, you know, being kind, but you also just have to remember that there's a human being at the other end.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's, you know, again, it's just, we're all humans and, you know, there's going to be emotions and, but yeah, be kind and work hard.
Going back to the working mum piece as well, I think there's, you know, that's could be certainly a whole topic all by itself, and I probably not the best person to to maybe comment on this, but you know, I think that's a real interesting area, because I've seen there's a lot to unpack in that, and I think there's a lot of expectation on women in the workplace and being mums. And one of the things that we've heard is, you know, you have to sort of parent like you don't have a job. You know, you have to parent like you don't have a job and work like you don't work like you're not a parent. Yeah, that's a lot of pressure, I think, and I think there's you mentioned the support network, and I could sort of go on and on about this, and the way things are structured, the way the school systems and so on are structured around it. It's just not, you know, in my mind, there's a misalignment in terms of the environment that we live in versus the expectation that's been put on mothers to do that. And I think it can be a lot for people to unpack. It's a lot. And I think that, I've seen examples where women have been passed over for things like bonuses and so on. They've been out on maternity leave or, whatever it might be. So I think there's still a lot more work to do to make that a more level, certainly a more level playing field. Do you have any advice to perhaps women that may just be going back into the workplace, or maybe have just had their first child and are trying to think about what to do? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's so different now. I mean, there's a lot more support, just in the corporate world, today than there was, even, 10, 20 years ago. And I my advice for, working moms or those just coming, back from maternity leave is find your people, find your sisterhood, find your support system professionally and personally. Not everyone has it. I certainly recognize, there are the unfortunate ones, even if it's one person, whatever that person may be, whether it's, a neighbor or, a colleague or, an executive or leader, find someone, that can help kind of talk you off the ledge, when you have those days, because you will have those days. You will have those days where you wake up, after getting what feels like probably 20 minutes of sleep, and then you have to, really kind of, show up and you got to do presentations and you've got to, lead and maybe deliver some bad news or, kind of go and network and, and in your mind you're going, I'm so tired. I just want to go home and, and crash. Put on your game face, you'll be okay. Some may disagree, with that mindset. Every situation and everyone's experience, as a mom is different.
Yeah.
And I would say it takes a village. It really does. And you're going to have those days where you feel alone, that, no one really kind of knows what you're going through, but don't suppress it. Find someone who can just kind of, pep up your step, even if it's just a little Post-it note that says that you're not alone. The smallest gesture can have the biggest impact. So that would be my advice for anyone who's either going through it or about to embark on that journey. Being a mom and having, a career, are two wonderful things. They can happen simultaneously, they can happen at, at different stages, but it can be done. You will have to sacrifice, some things and have that push pull, but it can be done.
I think that's great advice, and I think that works not just for perhaps women that might be re-entering the workplace or thinking about what to do with their career after having children, but also for anyone that might perhaps be in a leadership position that hasn't had children, for example, and may have an employee that's returning to work that does have a child. So I think or children, should I say? So I think there's a lot of good words of wisdom in there for both sides of the party, and I think that really is sound advice. So really appreciate that. What's one thing in your career that you think you're most proud of? Perhaps something that people don't see or don't realize.
I mean, I would just continue on with what we were just talking about. I graduated, yesterday from high school because I'm so young. But, for me, spent, over 20 years, and I think probably people don't know this about me, or those, that I have worked with, or, certainly have, engaged with. I've spent the last 20 plus years commuting into New York from New Jersey. So I've spent pretty much a lifetime on New Jersey Transit, and it was not fun. New Jersey Transit is not the best transit, line, but in any case, it certainly, afforded me the option to, to transport myself from Trenton, New Jersey to Manhattan. But I spent over 20 years doing that commute 5 days a week, doing that grind. I would leave my house at basically 6 a.m. in the morning, and I would return home anywhere between 7:30 to 9 o'clock at night. And I did that, single. I did that, throughout my early stages of my marriage to then, raising 2 children. So through 2 pregnancies, breastfeeding, all of that, I did it 5 days a week, every single week for over 20 years. So I would think that's, and I said this to you, offline, I don't necessarily talk about, my career and my experience and my journey very often, but if there was one thing that I'm extremely proud of, is the fact that I did that while also growing and advancing in my career and juggling it.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of dedication and hard work and grit to get up and
yeah.
That's hardcore kind of employee I'd want.
I'm for hire.
So I mean, this has been great, Liz. A couple more questions, I guess, before we wrap. If you had to summarize, perhaps in one sentence, thinking about business and your experience in business and being successful in business, what would you say it all comes down to? What do you think is the most important thing?
One of the most important things is advocacy. I mean, it's, I know we've talked, briefly about networking, but it really boils down to advocacy. You need someone when you're not in the room to advocate for you. That means you have to, have those conversations. You have to network. You have to look for the constructive feedback. You have to constantly work on, what you need to improve or build or, refine and adjust to keep you on the tips of everyone's tongues. So I would say, to be successful, certainly in, your career or in the corporate environment, you have to have advocates.
So that's I haven't heard this one before. This is a really interesting statement that you make. And I think especially for people in a sales, well, as you say, in any position, but the world that I live in is one of, is one of sales. And I guess the way that we would perhaps translate that for people listening that are in the sales environment is a champion.
Yeah.
You need someone that's going to, if you're positioning a product or a service or something that you think is going to deliver value, you need to ensure that there's someone on the client side that sees that value and and that you align
exactly.
the value is, and that as they go up the chain and they're in those rooms, like you say, they are advocating for you. So do you have any thoughts on, and perhaps this is coming back to your statement earlier about work hard and be kind, but how do you create those advocates? How do you, how do you create that impression or ensure that
I mean, you have to constantly work on it. It's early on in my career, I didn't know what constructive feedback really was. I mean, people would say like, oh yeah, I got feedback. It wasn't until I had a really wonderful boss. She was, more friend than boss. But she was wonderful at giving constructive feedback. And through that feedback, you realize, okay, what am I doing great? What am I not doing great? And you start to really kind of build on, those moments of construction and say, okay, well, this is what I'm really great at. And then you start to understand, well, that's what I'm going to advocate as my strengths. So when you throw your hat in the ring for a project or for a role or, any opportunity that, that comes your way, which I would say, take that bull by the horn. And whether it's a good opportunity or not, there's always something to learn from that opportunity. Never stay stagnant, always keep learning, challenging the norm. And I would say it's really understanding and spending the time to really compartmentalize what you do well, where your it's not necessarily a weakness, where your opportunities are to strengthen your skill base. Are those moments that really kind of echo to how to become your own advocate, and then how to advocate for others, and how to bring and kind of join those forces together to really become known and not a wallflower.
Yeah, that's that is great advice and guidance. I think that's very, very interesting. So thank you for sharing that.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Certainly not easy, but you got to do it. You got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I could not agree with you more on that statement about you've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I think you're not learning or growing if you're not if you're not uncomfortable. I think if you find yourself in a position where you feel like you're the smartest person in the room, you need to change your situation and do something differently. But yes, become especially as you advance in your career, the conversations start to get hairier, or more challenging as you go further up the chain. And so there's you develop the skill to be able to have difficult conversations by stepping out of your comfort zone and kind of getting more exposure to challenging situations. I think that's great advice for anyone.
Yeah. For anyone listening, I've certainly not mastered it. It's not a mastery at this stage. No, it's still a work in progress. It's it's not like, oh, check, I've done that so so well. No, it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, but I think that's the point. If you do feel like you've mastered it, no one's ever mastered it.
Yeah.
If you feel like you've mastered it, then you've probably become complacent, I would say.
Yeah. And please teach a mastery class if you have.
Yeah, right. Yes. So then rounding off here, for the next generation that are coming through, for people that are listening, what is the one piece of advice, if you were to write it down on a napkin or a beer mat and hand it on to the next generation, what is the one piece of advice that you would, and there's obviously been a lot of advice in here, but what's the one piece of advice that you would pass on?
I would say look up. Just the younger generations, our devices are just, our lifeline. We can't, leave a room unless we have our phone in our hands. Most people can't go to the bathroom unless their iPhone is, right there with you, which is kind of gross, by the way. But in any case, unless you're taking, glamour shots, but in any case, I would say just look up. There's a whole big world out there, and you can learn so much by just looking up and watching the culture and watching people and and learning, especially in the corporate environment, reading the room, read the cues. Everybody has, body language that, is either subtle or quite loud. But, if you're not looking up and you're not, aware of that, you're just going to miss it. Yeah, so that would be certainly my advice, is just look up.
Yeah, be present, right? Because I think you learn a lot in those situations.
Talk to people,
Yeah.
face to face, have those conversations. It's not, don't send a Slack message or, kind of Zoom chat or Teams chat, God forbid. My colleagues, if they listen to this, they'll laugh, or a text message or, Snapchat, whatever form of, of communication, is chosen for that technical, kind of screen to screen. You just gotta, be present, look up, and have those human to human interactions, because, there's beauty there.
Well, and I think to your point about establishing a network, and the importance of that, and the importance of operating with trust and integrity, it's difficult to do behind the screen, and that's great advice for anyone that's listening, especially certainly from the younger generation. So thank you very much.
No, thank you,
Liz. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. This has been great. There's tons of great pieces of advice in here for anyone.
I hope so.
So thank you so much.
And pass along if anybody certainly disagrees. I'd love to hear your points of view as well. So, but thank you, Brian. It was a pleasure for me as well. Always fun chatting with you, no matter what, and I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.